Emily always dreamed of escaping the hustle and bustle of city life. When she found a charming old cottage in the remote town of Hollow Creek, it seemed like the perfect opportunity for a fresh start. The town was picturesque, nestled in a valley surrounded by dense forests and misty hills. The cottage, with its ivy-clad stone walls and overgrown garden, had an eerie, timeless quality. The townspeople were polite but distant, offering only curt nods when she mentioned her new home. Emily, eager to settle in, dismissed their odd behavior as simple small-town reserve. As she unpacked, she noticed the air in the cottage was unnaturally cold, despite it being a warm summer day. The silence was profound, almost oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. The windows, though clean, allowed only a faint, gloomy light to filter through, casting long shadows in the corners of each room. The more Emily explored, the more she felt an inexplicable sense of unease, as if the house itself was watching her every move. The first week in the cottage was marked by a series of unsettling occurrences. It started with minor disturbances: doors slightly ajar, objects misplaced, and an occasional cold draft. Emily attributed these to the quirks of an old house, but soon the disturbances became more pronounced. One night, while reading in the living room, she heard a soft, rhythmic thumping coming from upstairs. Her heart raced as she tried to ignore it, convincing herself it was just the house settling. However, the thumping grew louder and more insistent. She finally mustered the courage to investigate. The sound stopped abruptly when she reached the top of the stairs, but the air was unnaturally cold. She felt a chilling breath on the back of her neck, and when she turned around, there was nothing there, just the empty, shadowed hallway. She returned to her room, unsettled, and the thumping continued intermittently through the night, making sleep nearly impossible. Determined to understand the strange occurrences, Emily visited the local library the next day. The librarian, an elderly woman with a stern expression, seemed reluctant to speak about the cottage. When Emily mentioned her concerns, the librarian's demeanor changed. She handed Emily a worn, leather-bound book filled with the town's history. As Emily read through it, she discovered a chilling account of the Ward family, who had once lived in her cottage. The family had vanished under mysterious circumstances one stormy night, leaving behind only their young daughter, Lily, who was found wandering the streets, traumatized and incoherent. The town's history detailed Lily's claims of a dark presence in the house, a spirit that had tormented the family before their disappearance. The final entries described a malevolent entity that had been unleashed by the family's grief and desperation. Emily's heart pounded as she realized the true nature of the force haunting her home. The more Emily learned about the cottage's history, the more intense the hauntings became. Objects began to move on their own. Books flying off shelves, chairs scraping across the floor, and the temperature plummeting in certain rooms. One night, Emily saw a ghostly figure in the mirror of her bathroom. The outline of a woman, blurred and distorted, hovered just outside the doorway. Emily's heart raced and she spun around, but the bathroom was empty. The figure was gone. That night she was plagued by nightmares of a shadowy woman with hollow eyes, reaching out to her with skeletal hands. Each morning she awoke drenched in sweat, the terror of the night still fresh in her mind. The atmosphere in the cottage grew heavier with each passing day, and Emily's fear mounted. She knew she couldn't ignore the spirit any longer. It was growing bolder, more aggressive. Realizing she couldn't continue living in the haunted cottage, Emily decided to leave Hollow Creek. But as she packed her belongings, the house seemed to fight back. Doors that had always opened easily now refused to budge. Windows were stuck, and the air grew colder, pressing down on her like an invisible weight. Panic set in as Emily realized she was trapped. She tried every door and window, but nothing would open. The house seemed to close in on her. That night the footsteps returned, louder and more persistent. Emily could feel a cold presence following her, a whisper in her ear saying, "You can't leave." Desperate, she used a small iron key she found in the attic, hoping it would unlock the door. The key turned with a groan, and the door creaked open. Emily rushed outside, breathing heavily. But as she glanced back at the cottage, she saw a shadowy figure standing in the doorway, watching her leave. Emily knew she needed to confront the spirit directly. Armed with the knowledge from Margaret Ward's journal, she decided to perform a ritual to banish the entity. She gathered salt, a candle, and an iron object, a relic she had found in the attic, and set up a protective circle in the living room. As she began the ritual, the temperature in the room dropped drastically. Shadows twisted and writhed, and an oppressive silence fell over the house. Emily recited the incantation from the journal, her voice trembling. The air crackled with energy, and a ghostly wail filled the room, making it hard for her to concentrate. The house seemed to fight back, the walls shaking and the floorboards groaning. Emily's heart raced as she continued the incantation, pouring all her strength and resolve into the ritual. The spirit's anger was palpable, but Emily refused to give in. With a final, forceful declaration, she felt a sudden, heavy silence, and the oppressive weight in the room lifted. In the aftermath of the ritual, the cottage was eerily quiet. Emily, exhausted but relieved, began to pack up the last of her belongings. The doors and windows, which had been sealed shut, now opened with ease. As she prepared to leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still lurking in the shadows. The final moments of the ritual had been intense, and she worried that the spirit might still be lurking. The sun began to set, casting long, eerie shadows through the trees. Emily's anxiety grew as she prepared to leave. She glanced around the cottage one last time, half expecting to see the ghostly figure. The silence was profound, almost too quiet. As she drove away from Hollow Creek, she glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a faint, shadowy figure standing at the edge of the forest. Her heart pounded as she accelerated, leaving the town behind. But even as she drove away, she couldn't shake the feeling that the spirit was still watching her. Emily never returned to Hollow Creek. The experience had left her traumatized, and she struggled to adjust to normal life after escaping the haunted cottage. She researched other accounts of hauntings and learned that many people who had encountered such malevolent spirits felt their presence even after leaving the source. Emily's nightmares continued, and she often felt an unseen presence watching her. She moved to a new town, far away from Hollow Creek, but the memories of her time there lingered. Her new home was peaceful, but the fear of the unknown stayed with her. Occasionally she would hear a faint whisper or see a shadow move out of the corner of her eye. Though she tried to convince herself it was just her imagination, she couldn't shake the feeling that the spirit from Hollow Creek was still with her, waiting for the right moment to make itself known once more. Sam and Lisa decided to spend a weekend at the historic Redwood Hotel, known for its charm and picturesque location. The hotel, built in the early 1900s, had a reputation for its old-world elegance. However, it was also rumored to be haunted. Despite the stories, the couple was excited about their getaway. The hotel lobby, with its antique furnishings and grand chandelier, exuded an old-world charm. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with a stern expression, handed them the keys to room 13. She mentioned, almost casually, that room 13 had a reputation for being unusual. Lisa, brushing off the comment as part of the hotel's mystique, smiled and took the key. As they walked to their room, the hallway seemed to stretch on endlessly, and the air grew colder. They noticed that the corridor lights flickered intermittently, casting strange shadows on the walls. When they finally reached room 13, they unlocked the door and were greeted by a room that was both charming and slightly unsettling. The antique furnishings and dim lighting created an atmosphere of eerie elegance. That night, as Sam and Lisa prepared for bed, they noticed an old journal lying on the nightstand, hidden beneath a stack of old magazines. The leather cover was cracked and worn, and the pages were yellowed with age. Curiosity piqued, Sam opened the journal and began to read. The entries were written in a spidery, almost illegible script, detailing the experiences of a woman named Clara, who had stayed in the same room many years earlier. Clara wrote about strange noises, flickering lights, and an oppressive feeling of being watched. Her entries grew more frantic as she described ghostly apparitions and an overwhelming sense of dread. Sam and Lisa were intrigued, but initially dismissed the journal as an elaborate prank or a piece of the hotel's marketing. However, as they settled into bed, they couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The journal's entries seemed too vivid to be mere fiction. As the night wore on, Sam and Lisa were disturbed by a series of unsettling noises. It started with soft tapping sounds that seemed to come from the walls. They initially thought it was the old building settling, but the sounds grew louder and more rhythmic, almost like someone was knocking on the door. Lisa tried to ignore it, but the tapping became incessant. When Sam opened the door to check, the hallway was empty and silent. The flickering lights cast eerie shadows that danced on the walls. As they lay back down, Lisa noticed that the room's temperature had dropped significantly. A cold draft seemed to sweep through the room, and she could see her breath fogging up in the air. The unsettling feeling continued to grow, and they both felt an oppressive presence that seemed to hover just beyond their sight. Despite their efforts to stay calm, sleep eluded them as the night dragged on. Around midnight, Lisa woke to the sensation of someone gently shaking her shoulder. She turned to Sam, but he was fast asleep. The shaking persisted, and when she opened her eyes, she saw a shadowy figure standing at the foot of the bed. The figure was indistinct, a dark silhouette that seemed to blend with the shadows. Lisa's heart raced as she tried to wake Sam, but he remained unresponsive. The figure's presence seemed to grow stronger, and Lisa could feel a cold breath against her skin. She reached out to touch the figure, but it vanished before her eyes. She was left alone in the cold, dark room, with the lingering sensation of being watched. Sam eventually woke up, and Lisa told him about the encounter. He was skeptical, but agreed to investigate further. They checked the room thoroughly, but found no signs of anything unusual. Despite their efforts, the feeling of unease remained, and they were unable to shake the terror of the ghostly apparition. Determined to uncover more about the hotel's history, Sam and Lisa visited the hotel's library the next morning. They found old newspaper clippings and historical records that detailed a series of tragic events associated with the hotel. The most disturbing story was about a young woman named Clara, who had been a guest at the hotel in the early 1900s. Clara had been engaged to a wealthy man, but their relationship ended in tragedy. Her fiancé was found dead under mysterious circumstances, and Clara was rumored to have committed suicide in room 13. The newspaper articles described her death as a mysterious and tragic event, and many guests claimed to have seen her ghostly figure wandering the hotel. Sam and Lisa were horrified to discover that Clara's story matched the disturbing details in the journal they had found. They realized that the ghostly presence they had encountered might be connected to Clara's tragic past. Determined to confront the spirit, Sam and Lisa decided to spend one more night in room 13. They hoped that by acknowledging the spirit and showing respect, they could put an end to the disturbances. They performed a small ritual, lighting candles and speaking softly to Clara, acknowledging her pain and offering their sympathy. As they finished the ritual, the room grew eerily quiet. The oppressive atmosphere seemed to lift, and the cold draft disappeared. However, as they settled into bed, the flickering lights returned, and the tapping sounds resumed, louder than before. The room seemed to vibrate with an intense energy. Lisa felt a cold hand on her shoulder, and when she turned, she saw Clara's ghostly figure clearer than before. The figure seemed to be reaching out, and Lisa could feel a deep sadness emanating from the spirit. Sam and Lisa continued to speak softly to Clara, offering their understanding and compassion. Slowly, the figure began to fade, and the room's temperature returned to normal. The tapping sounds ceased, and a profound silence settled over the room. With the disturbances seemingly resolved, Sam and Lisa decided to check out of the hotel. As they packed their belongings, they noticed that the room was once again filled with an oppressive silence. The temperature had returned to normal, and the flickering lights had stopped. They felt a sense of relief as they left room 13, but the experience had left them deeply unsettled. The hotel's staff, who had been strangely distant throughout their stay, offered no comment on their departure. Sam and Lisa drove away from the Redwood Hotel, their minds filled with the haunting memories of their stay. The experience had left them questioning the boundaries between reality and the supernatural. They hoped that Clara's spirit had finally found peace, but they remained haunted by the ghostly encounter. After leaving the Redwood Hotel, Sam and Lisa tried to return to their normal lives, but the experience continued to affect them. They had trouble sleeping and often felt a cold presence in their home. Strange occurrences, such as flickering lights and unexplained noises, became frequent. They both experienced vivid nightmares, featuring the ghostly figure of Clara and the eerie atmosphere of room 13. Despite their attempts to move on, they couldn't shake the feeling that the spirit was still watching them. They researched paranormal phenomena and learned that many people who experienced hauntings reported lingering effects long after leaving the source of the disturbance. Sam and Lisa found themselves wondering if their encounter with Clara was a warning or a message from the other side. The haunting memories of the Redwood Hotel remained with them, a chilling reminder of the ghostly presence that had touched their lives. When Mark and Julie bought their new home, they were thrilled to find a charming, century-old house with plenty of character. The house was spacious, with high ceilings and ornate woodwork. The attic, which was filled with old furniture and dusty boxes, seemed like a perfect place for Mark's home office. Julie, however, had a strange feeling about the attic, but brushed it off as nerves. As they moved in, Mark began setting up his office in the attic, sorting through the old boxes and discovering relics of the past. Among the items, He found old photographs, letters, and a large antique mirror covered with a sheet. He uncovered the mirror and hung it on the attic wall, not realizing that it would become a focal point for the strange occurrences to come. The house was otherwise perfect, and the couple looked forward to settling in and making it their own. The first night in their new home was peaceful, but the next morning, Julie noticed that the mirror in the attic had shifted slightly. It now faced a different direction, as if someone had moved it. Julie mentioned it to Mark, but he dismissed it as a simple mistake during the move. Over the next few days, Julie felt a growing sense of unease whenever she went into the attic. She often heard strange noises, like footsteps or rustling coming from above. One night, while Mark was away on business, Julie heard a loud bang from the attic. Terrified, she went up to investigate but found nothing out of place. The mirror, however, seemed to be reflecting something unusual. Julie could see a dark shadow moving in the background, but when she looked closer, it vanished. She felt an icy chill and hurried back downstairs, her heart racing. She decided to tell Mark about the disturbances, hoping he would take her concerns seriously. Mark was skeptical of Julie's claims but agreed to investigate. He checked the attic for any signs of intrusion or structural issues but found nothing unusual. The old furniture and boxes seemed intact, and the mirror was securely mounted. Despite Mark's reassurances, Julie's anxiety continued to grow. The noises from the attic became more frequent, and the shadowy figure in the mirror seemed to appear more often. One evening, while Julie was alone in the house, she heard a loud thud from the attic. She hesitated but decided to go up and investigate. The attic was dark, and the mirror reflected only the empty room. Julie's anxiety peaked when she saw the shadow moving in the corner of the reflection. It seemed to grow larger and more distinct, with an almost human form. Julie felt a cold breeze and heard a low, guttural growl. She fled the attic, locking the door behind her, and tried to calm herself. Julie decided to do some research on the house's history, hoping to find clues about the strange occurrences. She discovered that the house had once belonged to a reclusive man named Thomas Blackwood, who had lived alone and was rumored to have been involved in dark practices. Thomas had died under mysterious circumstances, and the house had been vacant for many years before Mark and Julie purchased it. The more Julie learned, the more she felt that the shadowy figure in the attic might be connected to Thomas Blackwood. Mark, still skeptical, agreed to help Julie with her research. They found old records and newspaper articles that hinted at strange occurrences and unexplained phenomena linked to the house. Julie was convinced that the presence in the attic was related to Thomas and his dark past. She felt a growing urgency to understand the nature of the entity and how to deal with it. The hauntings in the attic grew more intense. Mark and Julie began experiencing disturbing events, doors slamming shut on their own, cold drafts and unexplained noises. The mirror in the attic became a focal point for the disturbances. One night, Mark was working late in his office when he heard a loud crash from the attic. He rushed up to find the mirror shattered on the floor, with pieces scattered around the room. The atmosphere in the attic was charged with a palpable sense of anger. The shadowy figure seemed to be growing more aggressive, its form becoming more distinct and menacing. Julie felt a constant sense of dread, and Mark's skepticism began to wane as he witnessed the increasing intensity of the hauntings. They decided to seek help from a paranormal investigator, hoping that an expert could provide answers and relief. The paranormal investigator, a woman named Sarah, arrived at the house and began her examination. She set up equipment to measure electromagnetic fields and conducted a thorough investigation of the attic. As Sarah worked, she felt a strong presence in the attic, describing it as a dark and malevolent force. She used a spirit box to communicate with the entity and recorded several disturbing responses. The spirit box revealed that the entity was indeed Thomas Blackwood, who was trapped in the house and angry about being disturbed. Sarah performed a cleansing ritual to try to pacify the spirit, but the entity resisted, causing a dramatic increase in the disturbances. The temperature in the attic dropped significantly, and the equipment recorded spikes in electromagnetic activity. Sarah warned Mark and Julie that the entity was powerful and would require ongoing effort to manage. Determined to put an end to the haunting, Mark and Julie decided to take matters into their own hands. They performed a series of rituals and used protective symbols to ward off the entity. They placed salt around the attic and burned sage to cleanse the space. Despite their efforts, the shadowy figure continued to appear, and the disturbances persisted. The final confrontation occurred one night when Mark and Julie faced the entity head-on. They conducted a powerful ritual to exorcise the spirit from the house. The attic was filled with a blinding light. As they recited the incantations and the shadowy figure became more agitated, the air was charged with energy, and the room shook with the force of the exorcism. After hours of intense struggle, the shadowy figure seemed to dissolve, and the disturbances ceased. Mark and Julie were left feeling exhausted but hopeful that they had finally rid the house of the malevolent presence. After the exorcism, Mark and Julie noticed a significant improvement in the atmosphere of the house. The hauntings ceased and the attic felt calmer and more welcoming. However, the experience had left them deeply affected. They continued to experience vivid dreams and occasional moments of unease. They were grateful that the entity seemed to have been banished but remained wary of the house's history. The experience had changed their perception of the supernatural, and they became more cautious about their surroundings. The haunting of the attic remained a chilling reminder of the dark presence that had once occupied their home. Mark and Julie decided to document their experience and share it with others, hoping to offer insight into the reality of dealing with malevolent spirits. The house, now free of its dark past, became a place of comfort and safety, but the memories of the shadow in the attic continued to haunt their thoughts. Laura and her friends planned a weekend getaway to a remote cabin in the Whispering Woods. The cabin, located deep in the forest, was known for its seclusion and tranquility. It was the perfect escape from their busy lives. Upon arrival, the cabin was charming, with its rustic wooden beams and cozy interior. The forest surrounding the cabin was dense and mysterious, with tall trees that seemed to whisper in the wind. The friends were excited to explore the area and enjoy their time in nature. As night fell, they gathered around the fireplace, sharing stories and enjoying each other's company. However, a strange feeling settled over the group as the wind howled outside, and the trees seemed to rustle with an unsettling energy. Despite the initial excitement, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the forest. The first night in the cabin was relatively uneventful, but as they settled into their rooms, strange sounds began to disturb the group. Laura, who was sleeping alone, heard soft whispers coming from outside her window. The whispers were faint but distinct, as if someone was trying to communicate with her. She tried to ignore the sounds, attributing them to the wind or her imagination. However, the whispers grew louder and more persistent, eventually waking her friends. They went outside to investigate but found nothing unusual. The forest was eerily quiet, and the whispers had ceased as suddenly as they had started. The friends reassured each other, attributing the noises to the natural sounds of the forest. Yet, the unease lingered, and Laura couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The next day, Laura and her friends decided to explore the forest. As they hiked deeper into the woods, they discovered an old, dilapidated cabin hidden among the trees. The cabin was overgrown with vines and appeared to have been abandoned for years. Intrigued, they ventured inside and found old, decaying furniture and strange symbols scrawled on the walls. Among the debris, they discovered an old journal filled with disturbing entries. The journal belonged to a hermit who had lived in the cabin many years ago. The entries described strange occurrences, including whispers in the night, ghostly apparitions, and a feeling of being constantly watched. The hermit's writings grew increasingly frantic, detailing a growing sense of dread and a dark presence that seemed to haunt the forest. Laura and her friends were disturbed by the journal's contents but decided to return to their cabin, hoping to put the unsettling discovery behind them. That night, the whispers returned with a vengeance. The group was gathered around the fireplace when they heard a loud thud from outside. The noise was followed by the sound of rustling leaves and distant whispers. The friends were frightened and decided to investigate, but the forest was pitch dark, and the whispers seemed to come from all directions. As they ventured outside, the whispers grew louder and more insistent. The wind howled through the trees, and the forest seemed to come alive with eerie sounds. The friends felt a growing sense of fear and anxiety, as if something was closing in on them. They returned to the cabin, but the feeling of being watched persisted. The whispers continued throughout the night, and sleep was elusive for everyone. The forest seemed to hold a sinister presence, and the friends began to question their decision to stay. The following day, Laura and her friends were exhausted and on edge. They decided to leave the cabin early, but their plans were interrupted by strange occurrences. Objects in the cabin began to move on their own. Furniture shifted, doors creaked open, and strange shadows flickered in the corners of their vision. The atmosphere in the cabin was oppressive, and the whispers continued to plague them. Laura and her friends attempted to document the paranormal activity, using their phones to record any unusual sounds or sights. The recordings captured faint whispers and eerie, unexplained phenomena. They also discovered that the symbols in the old cabin's journal matched the ones they had seen in their own cabin. The connection between the two locations deepened their sense of dread. The friends decided to contact a local paranormal expert, hoping for an explanation and a way to rid themselves of the disturbing presence. The paranormal expert, a man named James, arrived at the cabin and conducted an investigation. He used various tools to measure electromagnetic fields and record spiritual activity. James reported that the readings were off the charts, indicating a powerful and malevolent force in the area. He explained that the Whispering Woods had a dark history, with several accounts of supernatural occurrences and ghostly apparitions. The old cabin they had discovered was believed to be a focal point for the malevolent energy. James performed a cleansing ritual, using incense and protective symbols to purify the space. During the ritual, the whispers grew louder and more agitated, as if the entity was resisting the cleansing. James warned Laura and her friends that the presence in the woods was deeply rooted and would require ongoing effort to manage. He advised them to leave the cabin and avoid the area in the future. Laura and her friends decided to follow James's advice and leave the cabin immediately. They packed their belongings quickly, feeling a growing urgency to escape the forest. As they drove away, the whispers seemed to follow them, echoing in their minds. The sense of being watched persisted, even after they left the Whispering Woods. The friends were relieved to be away from the cabin, but remained haunted by their experience. The forest had left a lasting impression on them, and they struggled to shake the feeling of unease. Laura and her friends vowed never to return to the Whispering Woods, and the memory of the whispers became a chilling reminder of their harrowing encounter. Back in the safety of their homes, Laura and her friends tried to resume their normal lives. However, they found it difficult to shake the fear and anxiety that had settled over them. The whispers seemed to linger in their minds, and they experienced vivid nightmares about the forest and the malevolent presence they had encountered. Laura often found herself drawn to the old journal and the symbols, trying to understand what they meant and why the entity was so powerful. She researched the history of the Whispering Woods and discovered that it was considered a place of dark energy, with many reports of supernatural activity over the years. The experience had changed her perception of the supernatural, and she became more cautious about exploring unknown and remote locations. The Whispering Woods remained a haunting memory, and Laura and her friends were left with a deep-seated fear of the unknown. Tom and his friends decided to go on a camping trip to a remote site in the mountains. The site was known for its stunning views and peaceful surroundings. They set up their tents near a clear, babbling brook and spent the day hiking and enjoying the natural beauty of the area. As night fell, they gathered around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories. The night was clear, and the stars shone brightly overhead. Tom felt a sense of tranquility and contentment as they relaxed by the fire. However, as the evening wore on, Tom noticed a strange figure watching them from the edge of the campsite. The figure was dressed in old-fashioned camping gear and seemed to be standing still, observing them intently. Tom shrugged it off as a trick of the light or perhaps someone else camping nearby. Later that night, Tom and his friends were startled by a loud noise coming from the woods. It sounded like someone or something was moving through the underbrush. They went to investigate but found nothing unusual. The forest was dark and silent, and the strange figure they had seen earlier was no longer in sight. The friends returned to their campfire and continued their evening activities, but Tom couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. As they settled into their tents for the night, Tom heard footsteps outside his tent. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, as if someone was walking around the campsite. He tried to ignore the noise, convincing himself that it was just the wind or an animal. However, the footsteps continued, growing closer and more distinct. Tom felt a growing sense of unease and decided to investigate. The next morning, Tom and his friends discovered that one of their camping supplies was missing, an old camping lantern they had brought with them. They searched the campsite and the surrounding area but couldn't find any trace of the lantern. The friends were puzzled but decided to continue with their plans, hoping that the lantern would turn up. As they went about their day, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. He felt a growing sense of paranoia and unease, as if someone or something was lurking in the woods. That night, as they gathered around the campfire, Tom saw the strange figure again, standing at the edge of the clearing. The figure was still and silent, and its presence sent a chill down Tom's spine. He tried to point it out to his friends, but they couldn't see anything unusual. Later that night, as Tom and his friends were settling into their tents, they heard a blood-curdling scream coming from the woods. The scream was followed by the sound of footsteps running through the underbrush. The friends were terrified and scrambled out of their tents to investigate. They followed the sounds into the woods but found nothing. The forest was dark and silent, and the only evidence of the disturbance was a series of broken branches and disturbed leaves. Tom and his friends were shaken by the experience and decided to return to their campsite. They were on edge for the rest of the night, unable to sleep. Tom was convinced that the strange figure and the mysterious sounds were connected to the disappearance of their lantern and the eerie scream they had heard. The following day, Tom and his friends decided to pack up and leave the campsite. They had had enough of the strange occurrences and were eager to get back to civilization. As they were packing up their gear, Tom saw the strange figure again, standing at the edge of the forest. This time, the figure was closer and seemed to be moving toward them. Tom's heart raced as he watched the figure approach. It was dressed in old-fashioned camping gear and had a ghostly, translucent appearance. The figure seemed to be reaching out toward Tom as if trying to communicate. Tom was frozen with fear and couldn't move. The figure stopped a few feet away from Tom and let out a mournful cry before disappearing into the forest. Tom and his friends returned home and were determined to find out more about the strange figure they had encountered. They researched the history of the area and discovered that there had been several reports of ghostly apparitions and strange occurrences at the campsite over the years. According to local legends, the figure they had seen was the ghost of a camper who had disappeared mysteriously many years ago. The ghost was said to wander the forest, searching for something or someone. The friends were disturbed by the discovery and felt a sense of unease about their encounter. They decided to contact a paranormal expert to learn more about the ghost and how to deal with it. The paranormal expert, a man named David, visited the campsite and conducted an investigation. He used various tools to measure electromagnetic fields and recorded spiritual activity. David reported that there was indeed a strong presence in the area, and the readings indicated that the ghost was restless and seeking something. He explained that the ghost was likely trapped in the forest and unable to find peace. David performed a cleansing ritual to try to help the ghost move on, but the process was challenging due to the ghost's strong attachment to the area. David advised Tom and his friends to avoid the campsite and to be cautious about future encounters with the paranormal. Tom and his friends were relieved to have some answers, but remained haunted by their experience. They avoided the campsite and tried to move on with their lives. However, the memory of the ghostly figure and the eerie encounters in the forest stayed with them. Tom often wondered about the ghost's story and what had happened to the camper who had disappeared. The encounter had changed his perspective on the supernatural, and he became more cautious about exploring unknown and remote locations. The Whispering Woods remained a chilling reminder of their haunting encounter, and Tom and his friends were left with a lingering sense of unease. Sarah loved visiting antique shops and often found unique and intriguing items. One day she stumbled upon a small, dusty shop in a quiet part of town. The shop was filled with old furniture, trinkets, and various curiosities. As Sarah explored the shop, she noticed an old leather-bound diary on a dusty shelf. The diary was intricately designed, with a silver clasp and ornate patterns on the cover. Intrigued, Sarah picked it up and flipped through the pages. The diary was filled with handwritten entries, but the ink was faded and the writing was difficult to read. Despite its condition, Sarah felt a strange connection to the diary and decided to purchase it. Back at home, Sarah began to read the diary. The entries were written by someone named Elizabeth who had lived in the early 1900s. The entries detailed Elizabeth's daily life, her struggles, and her fears. As Sarah read further, she noticed that the entries became increasingly disturbing. Elizabeth wrote about dark forces that seemed to be following her, strange dreams, and a growing sense of dread. The diary also contained several drawings of eerie figures and symbols. Sarah was captivated by the diary and couldn't put it down. She felt an unsettling connection to Elizabeth's experiences and began to feel a sense of unease in her own life. Soon after Sarah started reading the diary, She began to experience strange occurrences in her home. She heard unexplained noises such as footsteps and whispers, and her belongings seemed to move on their own. Sarah dismissed these events as coincidences or her imagination, but the occurrences grew more frequent and unsettling. She began to feel a presence in her home, as if someone or something was watching her. The disturbances reached a climax one night when Sarah woke up to find the diary lying on her chest, open to a page that described a haunting vision Elizabeth had experienced. The vision involved a shadowy figure standing at the foot of her bed, watching her as she slept. Desperate to understand what was happening, Sarah decided to research the diary's origins. She discovered that Elizabeth had been a young woman who had lived in the area over a century ago. Elizabeth's diary revealed that she had been tormented by a malevolent entity that had ultimately driven her to madness. The entity was said to be a curse that had been passed down through generations, affecting those who came into contact with the diary. Sarah found accounts of other people who had experienced similar disturbances after encountering the diary. The revelation filled Sarah with fear and dread, and she realized that she might be the next victim of the curse. Determined to rid herself of the curse, Sarah sought help from a paranormal expert named Emily. Emily conducted a thorough investigation and confirmed that there was indeed a powerful and malevolent presence attached to the diary. She explained that the diary was cursed and that the entity had a strong hold on those who came into contact with it. Emily performed a cleansing ritual to try to remove the curse from the diary and protect Sarah from the malevolent force. During the ritual, the disturbances in Sarah's home intensified, and the entity seemed to resist the cleansing. Emily warned Sarah that the curse was deeply rooted and that it might require ongoing effort to manage. Despite Emily's efforts, the disturbances in Sarah's home continued. Sarah felt a growing sense of desperation and decided to confront the entity directly. She followed the instructions in the diary for a ritual that Elizabeth had attempted to use to banish the entity. The ritual involved several complex steps, including the use of protective symbols and incantations. As Sarah performed the ritual, she felt a powerful presence in the room, and the air grew cold and heavy. The entity seemed to resist the ritual, and Sarah struggled to maintain her focus. The confrontation reached its peak when Sarah saw a shadowy figure appear before her, mimicking the descriptions in the diary. After the ritual, the disturbances in Sarah's home gradually subsided. The haunting experiences became less frequent, and Sarah was able to regain a sense of normalcy. However, the experience had left a lasting impact on her. She was haunted by the memory of the shadowy figure and the malevolent presence she had encountered. Sarah decided to keep the diary in a safe place and avoid reading it further. She was wary of the potential dangers associated with it and chose to focus on moving forward with her life. The curse had been a chilling reminder of the dark forces that could lurk within seemingly innocent objects. Even though the disturbances had lessened, Sarah remained cautious and vigilant. She continued to research the history of the diary and the entity connected to it, hoping to gain a deeper understanding of the curse. The experience had changed her perspective on the supernatural, and she became more aware of the potential dangers of interacting with mysterious and cursed objects. Sarah's encounter with the diary remained a haunting memory, and she shared her story with others as a warning about the dangers of delving into the unknown. The diary remained a symbol of the dark forces that could be unleashed through curiosity and recklessness. Emily and her friends received an intriguing invitation to a remote cabin in the mountains. The invitation promised a weekend getaway with breathtaking views and a chance to disconnect from their busy lives. Excited for a break, they accepted the invitation and made their way to the cabin. The journey was long and winding, taking them through dense forests and over rugged terrain. When they finally arrived, they were greeted by an old, charming cabin nestled in a secluded clearing. The cabin looked picturesque against the backdrop of towering pine trees and a clear blue sky. The group settled in, eager to explore their surroundings and enjoy a relaxing weekend. The first evening at the cabin was peaceful. They enjoyed a cozy dinner and sat around the fireplace sharing stories and laughter. However, as night fell, they started to notice strange occurrences. The wind howled through the trees, and the temperature dropped suddenly. Emily heard faint knocking sounds coming from the walls and windows, but when she investigated, she found nothing amiss. The others dismissed it as the wind or the house settling. Later that night, one of Emily's friends, Mark, noticed that his belongings were missing. He searched the cabin but found no sign of his items. The group was puzzled, but decided to let it go and get some rest. The next morning, the group woke up to find that the cabin had vanished. The clearing where it had stood was now empty, and the cabin's surroundings looked completely different. The trees seemed unfamiliar, and the paths they had walked the previous day were nowhere to be seen. Panic set in as they realized they were lost in the forest with no clear way back. They tried to retrace their steps, but only found more confusing and unfamiliar terrain. The once beautiful cabin was gone, and the forest seemed to close in around them. The group grew increasingly anxious as the day wore on, and their attempts to find help proved fruitless. As night approached, the group stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin that looked eerily similar to the one they had stayed in. It was in disrepair, with broken windows and a rotting exterior. They decided to explore it, hoping it might offer some clues or shelter. Inside, they found old, dusty furniture and strange symbols carved into the walls. The cabin was filled with an unsettling atmosphere, and they felt as though they were being watched. Emily discovered a journal with entries describing similar experiences, people who had stayed in the cabin and never returned. The journal mentioned a malevolent force that caused the cabin to disappear and trap its occupants in an ever-changing forest. The group's fear intensified as they realized they were part of a terrifying pattern. They experienced chilling drafts and heard whispers echoing through the cabin. Their attempts to leave the cabin only led them back to the same spot, as if the forest was trapping them in a loop. Desperation set in, and they began to argue and panic. Emily tried to keep everyone calm and focused on finding a way out. They spent the night in the abandoned cabin, haunted by the idea that they were trapped by some supernatural force. The feeling of being watched and the eerie whispers continued to unsettle them. In the dead of night, Emily saw a shadowy figure outside the cabin. The figure moved swiftly and seemed to be beckoning them. She woke the others, and they decided to follow the figure, hoping it would lead them to safety. They ventured into the dark forest, guided only by the dim light of their flashlights. As they followed the figure, they encountered bizarre and unsettling phenomena. Trees that seemed to move and paths that twisted in impossible ways. The figure led them to a clearing where a strange portal-like structure was located. The structure pulsed with an eerie light, and the figure seemed to disappear into it. The group was both terrified and hopeful. They decided to enter the portal, hoping it would take them out of the cursed forest. As they stepped through the portal, they were engulfed by a blinding light. When they emerged on the other side, they found themselves back at the original clearing where the cabin had first appeared. The cabin was gone, but they were relieved to be back in familiar surroundings. They made their way back to civilization, exhausted and traumatized by their experience. The memory of the vanishing cabin and the haunted forest remained with them, a chilling reminder of the supernatural forces they had encountered. Emily and her friends returned to their normal lives, but they were deeply affected by their experience. They tried to move on, but found it difficult to shake the fear and anxiety they felt. They avoided discussing the incident, but the memory of the vanishing cabin and the malevolent force that had trapped them continued to haunt them. Emily researched the history of the forest and discovered that it had long been associated with strange and unexplained phenomena. The experience left a lasting impact on her and her friends, and they became more cautious about venturing into unknown or isolated areas. The vanishing cabin remained a haunting memory, a reminder of the dangers that lurk in the unexplained. Anna found an antique music box at a flea market. It was an exquisite piece with intricate carvings and a delicate mechanism. The vendor claimed it was a rare find and mentioned that it had belonged to a wealthy family who had experienced strange occurrences after acquiring it. Intrigued by the music box's beauty and the vendor's eerie tale, Anna bought it and took it home. She placed it on a shelf in her living room, admiring its craftsmanship. That evening, as she wound the key and listened to the soft, haunting melody it played, she felt an odd sensation, as if something was watching her. As days passed, Anna began to hear the melody of the music box playing on its own. even when she hadn't wound it. The sound would drift through her home, often when she was alone or in the middle of the night. The melody was both beautiful and unsettling, and it seemed to be accompanied by faint whispers and murmurs. Anna tried to ignore it, thinking it was just her imagination or the result of a mechanical malfunction. However, the melody persisted, and she felt increasingly uneasy. The music box's presence seemed to have a strange effect on her, causing her to have vivid and disturbing dreams. One night, as Anna was trying to sleep, she was awakened by the music box's melody. The sound was louder than usual and seemed to be coming from the hallway. She got up to investigate and saw a ghostly figure standing at the end of the hallway. The figure was dressed in old-fashioned clothing and appeared to be translucent. It was staring at her with a mournful expression. Anna was paralyzed with fear and could only watch as the figure slowly faded away. The music box continued to play its haunting melody, and Anna's fear grew as she realized the figure was somehow connected to it. Desperate for answers, Anna contacted a paranormal investigator named Claire. Claire visited Anna's home and conducted an investigation. She used various tools to measure electromagnetic fields and recorded spiritual activity. Claire confirmed that there was a strong presence associated with the music box. She explained that the music box was likely cursed or haunted by the spirit of someone who had suffered a tragic fate. Claire conducted a cleansing ritual to try to remove the spirit and the negative energy from the music box. During the ritual, the music box's melody grew more intense and chaotic, as if the spirit was resisting the cleansing. Claire discovered that the music box had belonged to a young girl who had died under mysterious circumstances many years ago. The girl's family had been plagued by misfortune and supernatural occurrences after acquiring the music box. Claire explained that the spirit of the girl seemed to be trapped in the music box, unable to move on due to unresolved issues or a traumatic death. The spirit was using the music box's melody to communicate its distress and seek help. Anna felt a deep sense of sympathy for the spirit, but was also terrified by the presence that had invaded her home. Claire suggested that Anna try to communicate with the spirit and help it find peace. Anna followed Claire's instructions, setting up a seance and using various methods to connect with the spirit. She tried to understand the spirit's message and address its pain. During the seance, Anna felt a strong presence and heard the music box's melody playing louder and more urgently. The spirit seemed to respond to her efforts, but it was clear that it was still deeply troubled. Anna felt a sense of connection and empathy for the spirit, but struggled to help it find resolution. As the days went by, the haunting experiences continued, and the music box's melody grew more frantic. Anna and Claire decided to perform another cleansing ritual, hoping to finally release the spirit from the music box. The ritual involved a series of complex steps, including the use of protective symbols and incantations. The music box's melody became increasingly discordant, and the atmosphere in Anna's home grew tense. During the ritual, Anna saw the ghostly figure again, appearing more agitated and desperate. The confrontation reached a climax when the music box suddenly stopped playing, and the figure vanished. After the final ritual, the haunting experiences in Anna's home subsided. The music box no longer played on its own, and the eerie presence seemed to have left. Anna felt a sense of relief but also sadness for the spirit that had been trapped. She decided to keep the music box in a safe place, as a reminder of the haunting experience and the spirit's story. Anna continued to research the history of the music box and the young girl it had belonged to, hoping to find closure for the spirit. The haunting melody remained a chilling reminder of the supernatural forces that can linger in seemingly ordinary objects. David was on a business trip to a remote town and stayed at an old hotel that had been recommended to him. The hotel was charming, but had a reputation for being haunted. David, a skeptic, dismissed the stories as local folklore and checked into his room. The room was quaint and old-fashioned, with vintage furniture and a large ornate mirror. David settled in, prepared for a productive trip. That night he had trouble sleeping due to the creaky floorboards and strange noises coming from the hallway. He dismissed it as the quirks of an old building and tried to get some rest. The following night, David started experiencing strange occurrences in his room. He heard footsteps and whispers in the hallway and saw shadows moving in the corners of his room. The mirror in the room seemed to have a strange, otherworldly reflection, and David felt an unsettling presence whenever he looked at it. He tried to ignore the disturbances and focused on his work. However, the experiences grew more intense, with objects moving on their own and the temperature in the room dropping suddenly. One night, as David was preparing for bed, he saw a ghostly figure in the mirror. The figure was a woman dressed in old-fashioned clothing with a sorrowful expression on her face. She seemed to be reaching out to him, her eyes filled with sadness and desperation. David was terrified and tried to convince himself that it was a trick of the light or his imagination. However, the figure continued to appear in the mirror, and the disturbances in his room grew more frequent. David began to feel a strong sense of foreboding and realized that something sinister was connected to the room. Desperate for answers, David researched the hotel's history and discovered that it had been the site of several tragic events. The hotel had once been the residence of a wealthy family, and the woman in the mirror was the wife of the family's patriarch. She had died under mysterious circumstances, and her spirit was said to haunt the hotel. The hotel had been plagued by reports of ghostly apparitions and supernatural occurrences. David learned that many guests had experienced similar disturbances in the same room he was staying in. David contacted a local paranormal investigator named Rebecca, who agreed to investigate the hotel room. Rebecca arrived with her equipment and conducted a thorough investigation. She used EMF meters and recording devices to measure spiritual activity and capture evidence of the haunting. During the investigation, Rebecca confirmed the presence of a strong and malevolent spirit associated with the room. She explained that the spirit was trapped and had a history of causing disturbances for those who stayed in the room. Rebecca and David decided to attempt to communicate with the spirit and understand its intentions. They conducted a seance in the room, using various methods to connect with the spirit. The atmosphere in the room grew tense, and the disturbances intensified. David saw the ghostly figure again, appearing more agitated and desperate. The spirit seemed to be trying to convey a message, but was unable to do so clearly. David and Rebecca struggled to make sense of the spirit's communication and address its needs. As the investigation progressed, the disturbances in the room reached a climax. The spirit became increasingly hostile, and the room's temperature dropped dramatically. Rebecca and David decided to perform a cleansing ritual to release the spirit and banish the negative energy from the room. The ritual involved a series of complex steps and protective measures. The room's atmosphere grew heavy and oppressive as the spirit resisted the ritual. David saw the ghostly figure one last time, and the confrontation reached a dramatic peak. After the cleansing ritual, the disturbances in the hotel room subsided. The ghostly figure and the eerie reflections in the mirror disappeared, and the room returned to a normal state. David felt a sense of relief, but was deeply affected by the experience. He checked out of the hotel and continued his business trip, haunted by the memories of the accursed room. The experience left him with a new perspective on the supernatural, and he shared his story with others as a cautionary tale about the dangers of encountering malevolent spirits.
Lisa attended an art auction at an upscale gallery. Among the many pieces displayed was a hauntingly beautiful painting of a woman with an unsettling gaze. The painting was rumored to have a dark history, with stories of its previous owners experiencing misfortune and strange occurrences. Despite the rumors, Lisa was captivated by the painting and decided to place a bid. She won the auction and proudly took the painting home, eager to display it in her living room. The painting's dark, mysterious aura intrigued her, and she felt a sense of connection to it. Soon after bringing the painting home, Lisa began to notice strange occurrences. The atmosphere in her living room changed, and she felt an oppressive presence whenever she was near the painting. She heard unexplained noises and saw shadows moving in the corners of the room. The painting seemed to change subtly, with the woman's expression shifting to a more sinister and menacing look. Lisa tried to ignore the disturbances, but they grew more frequent and unsettling. She felt a growing sense of dread and unease whenever she was alone in the house. Lisa decided to investigate the painting's history to understand the source of the disturbances. She learned that the painting had once belonged to a reclusive artist who had died under mysterious circumstances. The artist was rumored to have been involved in dark and occult practices, and the painting was said to be cursed. The painting's previous owners had reported similar experiences of haunting and misfortune. Lisa's research revealed that the painting was believed to contain the trapped spirit of a woman who had been wronged and was seeking revenge. Desperate to rid herself of the painting's malevolent influence, Lisa contacted a paranormal investigator named Marcus. Marcus conducted an investigation and confirmed that there was a strong and malevolent presence associated with the painting. He used various tools to measure spiritual activity and capture evidence of the haunting. During the investigation, Marcus detected a powerful and hostile energy emanating from the painting. He explained that the painting was indeed cursed, and that the spirit trapped within it was causing the disturbances in Lisa's home. Marcus and Lisa decided to attempt to remove the curse from the painting. They performed a ritual to cleanse the painting and release the trapped spirit. The ritual involved several complex steps, including the use of protective symbols and incantations. As they conducted the ritual, the disturbances in Lisa's home intensified, and the painting seemed to resist the cleansing. The woman's expression in the painting became increasingly distorted and malevolent. Marcus warned Lisa that the curse was deeply rooted and that it might require ongoing effort to manage. Despite their efforts, the disturbances in Lisa's home continued to escalate. The painting's influence grew stronger, and Lisa experienced increasingly disturbing phenomena. She saw the woman in the painting move and interact with her environment, as if the painting was coming to life. The oppressive presence in her home became unbearable, and Lisa felt as though she was being watched and tormented by the spirit. She experienced vivid and terrifying nightmares, and her sense of normalcy was shattered. Lisa and Marcus decided to confront the spirit directly in a final attempt to break the curse. They performed a powerful and elaborate ritual to banish the spirit and neutralize the painting's negative influence. The ritual involved invoking protective deities and using sacred objects to shield themselves from the spirit's wrath. The atmosphere in Lisa's home grew tense and volatile as they conducted the ritual. The painting's malevolent energy reached a climax, and the confrontation became a dramatic and intense struggle. After the final ritual, the disturbances in Lisa's home gradually subsided. The painting's influence diminished, and Lisa was able to regain a sense of normalcy. She decided to store the painting in a secure location, away from her living space. The experience had left a lasting impact on her, and she was wary of the potential dangers of cursed or malevolent objects. Lisa continued to research the painting's history and the spirit trapped within it, hoping to gain a deeper understanding of the curse. The painting remained a chilling reminder of the dark forces that can be unleashed through art and the supernatural.